Welcome to the Vital Point Pathways to Integration, where we explore the practices that bring us back to our bodies, our breath, and our being. On this show, we're crafting a space for not just insight, but integration, being able to turn inward to connect to your own inner wisdom as you travel the pathways to integration. A quick invite before we begin. Pathways to Integration on School is where listeners go to continue the work. You'll find a Start Here pathway, guided practices, and a place to ask questions and connect to me and other travelers. It's free to join at school.com/pathways to integration. Even before our work with medicine and psychedelics begin, we arrive with a view, a collection of beliefs, values, cultural assumptions, spiritual frameworks, and ideas about what healing is supposed to look like. Whether we recognize it or not, that view helps shape what we perceive, how we interpret the experience, and what we do with it afterwards. Pierre Bouchard returns to the Vital Point for this deep conversation about the relationship between view, practice, and result. Drawing from Buddhism, Kashmir Shaivism, psychotherapy, and his work as a psychedelic facilitator, Pierre explores why simply trusting the medicine may be an incomplete approach to psychedelic healing and integration. For those of you that may not know Pierre, he's a licensed professional counselor and minister with a group practice in Boulder and Lyons, Colorado. He integrates interpersonal neurobiology and trauma therapy with in-depth studies in Buddhist psychology, transpersonal depth work, ritual, and consciousness exploration through psychedelic psychotherapy and ministry. He's a lead trainer for the Congregation for Sacred Practices, serves as a clinical consultant for the Wholeness Center in Fort Collins, and has operated as faculty or guest lecturer in psychedelic-assisted facilitator programs for organizations such as Elemental Psychedelics, Naropa University, and Psychedelics Today. He consults internationally and is committed to the effective, nuanced, and ethical reemergence of this field. He also has an awesome Substack called Psychedelic Artistry and is currently writing a book. Pierre's been on the show once before, so after you listen to this, go to episode 120 for our first conversation. This was a great conversation with Pierre. We consider what happens when profound experiences are filtered through the dominant values of consumerism, individualism, optimization, and scientific materialism. Psychedelics may radically expand consciousness, but expansion alone does not necessarily free us from the worldview we carried into the experience. Perhaps the path does not begin with a technique or a medicine. Perhaps it begins with how we learn to see. To continue exploring psychedelic integration, trauma-informed breathwork, and embodied inner work and community, join us at www.school.com/pathways to integration. One note before we get into the conversation. Although this was one of my favorites, there were some technical issues in the recording. And when the conversation begins, Pierre and I had been chatting. We had some technical issues. We switched recording platforms and then tried to dive back in. So there's not a long preamble. We really get right into it because we were already rehashing some of the ground that we had covered. And in order to really keep the flow going, I didn't want to completely start over. I tried to edit it in a way that you wouldn't notice, but just in case it feels like opening that's a little bit more abrupt than usual, that's why. And without further ado, I really hope that you enjoy this conversation with Pierre Bouchard as much as I did.
Great to be back with you here.
Thank you.
I was exposed to this framing, right? View, practice, result from 15 years of meditation, Buddhist practice. And, over the years in having a psychedelic practice, what I noticed was that as I had deep, important experiences with the mushrooms, it was very sort of spontaneously being framed for me through what I understood about life, consciousness, what's important, that had been cultivated by me through Buddhist practice for 15 years. And that when I compared notes with other people or when I started facilitating with people, what I found was that they were not necessarily arriving at the same conclusions I was. It was so baked in for me that I didn't realize how much it was informing my sense. And so I've come to see or think about this of that, as a very important part of what we're doing with psychedelics.
I'm curious what maybe some of those conclusions were, but also just to kind of keep the thread going of what you brought up. Uh, it's a really it's a really valid reason to examine the people that you're working with, right? Like because if you have one particular view or frame and then the facilitator that you're working with has a completely other worldview, that might create some friction in terms of how the experience goes. What comes up for me is within my work, I carry the frame of Groff and the inner healer, and that this process is happening from within, that the client and participant has the answers inside of them. And sometimes I can tell directly or indirectly that the participant is coming from a different view where they're expecting me to be doing something for their healing, like
Mm.
a more shamanic approach, maybe where like I'm getting in there and doing some sort of procedure or opening some sort of gateway or portal. It's a really important conversation to have beforehand of like, hey, this is the frame and the view that I'm coming from. I'm not here to jump in and like be your psychic surgeon, uh, so to speak.
I think the best we see of this, and maybe to just say very briefly, right? So when we say the view,
Mm,
we're talking about a philosophical orientation. You know,
yeah.
we're talking about views that shape what you perceive. And then the practice is like, what for, this is traditional Buddhist language, right? So it's like, so what's the practice? What type of meditation does somebody do? And then what's the fruit, the result? What happens? Does does holding this kind of view and doing this kind of practice result in what it says it will result in? You know, if we're talking in Buddhist framing, or or Christopher Wallace talks about this too in terms of you know tantric Shaivism as well. Same kind of thing. You're just like, yeah, does meditating in this way produce this type of consciousness and this type of unfolding in one's life? And I think, as we're saying, I think, this applies then to psychedelics. What do you go in with? And the thing is, it's not just what we go in with, but I would say that whatever we have as a belief structure, we are smuggling into our psychedelic experience. It can't help but show up there. It's how we understand the world. And then of course there's sort of what happens when you come out of it. What words do you choose to use to frame this big thing that just happened? And and then what do you do with it, right? That's sort of the fruit. And where I think this gets really interesting, and you're right. I mean, I think there's sort of where do we align as practitioners with people we're working with, and and there's good reason to have for us to be in, I think, more of a conversation too around what are our biases? What are we bringing to it that maybe the person who's coming to us isn't interested in? Where this really gets interesting to me, though, is that, um, to use Groff's term, right, we're understanding psychedelics as a non-specific amplifier. And where I think the whole trust the medicine, trust people's innate intelligence um, can be an incomplete picture is that if somebody doesn't have much framing for what this big thing happened, this big experience they're having, I think there's a big question of like, well, how do we make sense of it? And so it's not that somebody has no view, it's that the view they have might be quite thin. It
Right.
might be built on, new age platitudes, or the view that, we're all carrying layers of views, and then the one that we're all living in is the ideology of our civilization, which is consumerism and capitalism. And if we don't have anything else better to frame our experience, we can end up framing it through lenses that might not offer us the most as we're trying to do something with it in our lives afterwards.
So how do you address that in your work? Some sort of discussion with the client, at least beforehand and afterwards, of this is what may change, or this is what may be happening, or how do you approach that process?
Well, part of this is I think that the more one is practiced in a view,
Hmm.
and it's not just a view, I think it's one is practiced. There's a pretty simple sense here of I think don't try and take people to places you haven't been,
Yeah.
you know. Mm. Not that we could each be sort of exploring every nook and cranny of consciousness, but that um, there's a certain amount of um, if you don't know what it's like to be really blown apart or broken open or encountering certain big places that one goes in breath work or in psychedelics, then it's hard to know how to relate to somebody from that space. And I think what matters is actually having your own view and having, not your own, but having a view that's cultivated.
Right.
And that being able to sort of look through a number of lenses to be able to help somebody make sense of it. It's not that you, of course, want to tell somebody what it means, but that you can provide some offerings with it. It's like you can't tell someone to read Dostoevsky and then say, this is what Dostoevsky means. But if you've studied literature and you've been generally educated, there's a way in which the education ends up framing how you talk about Dostoevsky.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess where my curiosity goes is with that overlay that you mentioned of the culture and the consumer capitalist kind of view that we've all been indoctrinated with. I feel a lot of empathy for the quote unquote normal people that are not inundated in the psychedelic world, that are hearing sound bites or
Mhm.
news stories about the efficacy of some of these medicines. And the empathy, for one, goes for me back to like, this isn't what I was told in school. Like the language in school was drugs are bad and don't do them, and your brain is going to fry like an egg in the pan. Those sort of propaganda, but also the way that we treat medicine in general in our culture. and how that really, in my experience, does not align with the way that psychedelics actually heal and actually work. So curious about like how that process goes uh with people.
It's a really important thing. I'm glad you're bringing it up. And that, part of a consumerist culture is I'm able to buy something and it has it's a product, it's an effect, and um, the last thing I would want to seem here is anti-science. But I would say that um, the way that this at least current wave of psychedelics is getting framed is through psychedelic science, right? Looking at research, double-blinded research, which is incredibly hard to do with psychedelics because people know when they're on psychedelics.
Right.
There's no like,
Yeah.
it's like, no, I did or I didn't typically.
Yeah. Right.
But that, what we end up doing is trying to reduce down something so vast into some kind of objective measure that we can quantify, and that's I would say, by no means am I anti-science, but what I would say is that we may be using science for a job science isn't built for here terribly well. I heard a great quote from Ian McGilchrist not that long ago, who I'm totally in love with. He's a psychiatrist and philosopher who's written these just gigantic books around brain hemispheres and philosophy and what we can know and what we can't. And a lot of it really boils down to the left hemisphere has a way of encountering and experiencing the world where it likes everything to be discrete. It likes things to be orderly, and it will work within a model of what it knows to then represent that to the self as if it is in fact reality. But it's working within its known model of what it has, and then regurgitating that to itself. It's extremely useful in terms of capturing a level of detail. The right hemisphere likes to work in ambiguities. It works in sensation a lot more. It's a far more sort of flexible and fluid hemisphere through which to perceive. It's not saying the right hemisphere does this and the left one does that. It's saying these are modes of attention. The left hemisphere likes to say only what I have knows and matters. And the right hemisphere actually says, I've got an answer, and the left hemisphere has an answer. And when we blend the two of them together, we get a good answer. So it's far more tolerant of ambiguity and for a more nuanced view. And so within that, there's basically this view of we live in a culture that is a sort of a far more left hemispherically dominated culture currently, and that we would be better suited being more right dominant, with left being in service of the right hemisphere. This is just summarized 2,400 pages of Ian McGilchrist. It's been poorly, but the reason I mentioned that, I would say that, is that when we're looking at scientific research and how it can be supportive for psychedelics, we're basically using a left hemisphere mode of attention to try and answer and explore something that belongs to the realm of direct experience. And so it's very hard to, like, what are you going to grade all on a 5-point scale? And it's like, so we end up saying things like evidence-based psychedelic work, which is about as good as saying, like evidence-based symphony, or, data-driven lovemaking, It's just like these aren't ideas that actually work together.
Right.
But what we have then is right. And so what we're talking about is view. It's where are we looking from? And then what do we see from that place?
Yeah. Uh, one of the instructors that I had in SE, Raja Selvam, talked a lot about that, because he was bringing in not only your individual trauma, but the trauma of the collective, the trauma that exists in your family line. And literally he was getting pushback from people, the more, let's say, left hemisphere folks in the audience, of, well, where's your evidence for this? Like, where's your evidence for karma? If you're saying you might carry trauma from a past life, like, show me the evidence of that. And he said, well, that's the problem, is that your view is limited by what you can quantify. And actually, there are other systems of quantification that have been around for thousands of years that would absolutely accept what I'm saying, but you don't consider that valid. So maybe adjusting your view would be beneficial in this case. And I think that there's some of that when we're talking about psychedelics as well, right? Like, there are older indigenous systems where perhaps they're not approaching it with the same scientific rigor that we're used to in the modern age, but that doesn't mean that they're not just as sophisticated, if not more, than what we know or believe now.
Truly, and when we talk about rigor of consciousness and practice, there's like, right, a lifetime of cultivation in those traditions toward understanding and working with something, that we don't have, and that we're looking to numbers to solve. The quote I was thinking of from the Gilchrist was, you have to kill something in order to dissect it. There's a certain amount of, yes, killing an experience to try and break it down into numbers. There's an amazing example of this that's been unfolding just this week, in fact.
Right.
Brian Johnson live streamed taking 5-MeO-DMT on Sunday, and has been on podcasts all week talking about his experience. For those of you who don't know, Brian Johnson is an almost billionaire biohacker. His entire project is around sort of mastering death through optimization. And apparently, I think 700,000 people turned in for the live stream.
Wow.
And by all accounts, he had, one of those full blast 5-MeO-DMT experiences where he reported feeling this panic and towards having to surrender to it and having the most profound experience of his life, he said. And he came out of it and was in awe. And I think within 5 minutes said, this is the most underrated longevity molecule. And I can't help but it's comical to me, but I think I ultimately feel very sad for him that this is a man, this is seemingly like was raised Mormon, left the Mormon church in his early 30s, and seems to have become a full bore scientific materialist. He's probably the most data analyzed human body in existence. We have more markers for his physicality than probably anyone alive. He spends $2 million a year on data testing and trying things out to extend his life to the point of not dying. And ultimately, I think he's Samsara's greatest mascot. It's heartbreaking.
Yes. I'm laughing at the way that you put that, which I think is very apt. And that's something that at least if we're going back to the Buddhist frame, like a lot of these enlightened or close to enlightened masters are pointing out, it's like, no, it's still samsara. Like, and the goal is still, can we get out of it? How do we do that? Like, you can't throw your birthday party in the burning building, no matter how many balloons you put in.
Yeah. And it's stunning, and it just happened, so we'll see over time, right? But here's a man who has a deep frame around science, measurement, and optimization, and had what can only be described as sort of a near-death experience that's probably some mix of, the cosmic non-dual unitive experience that is, a typical place that big doses of 5-MeO
Right.
DMT take people. It can be one of the most profound experiences of somebody's life. And so the view he went in with was optimization. He had the full experience. And what he came out of it was doing anything other than securing your own existence is ridiculous. So, wow, a near-death experience that negates the value of dying.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see I would say like in a year from now, right? Is like, I think what we could really easily expect, and this is an issue of view, is that when people have really big experiences and they don't have a view that can help them metabolize that, what often happens is there's an amplification of grandiosity.
Right.
So he might get even weirder in the next year. He
It-
might become a full-blown weirdo. So
yeah.
this is view in action.
Yeah.
He's not transgressing anything. He's living out his view.
And proving that, giving everybody psychedelics is not the answer to, give all the
Yeah.
politicians psychedelics and we'll
Yeah.
solve all the problems,
No, we're just going to get more weirdly dressed assholes.
Yeah.
This is where the view on what are we practicing really matters. More and more, I've been thinking about the view in which we live in, and that there's this crazy intersection with all of this. And I would say the New Age world, which was legitimate, often spiritual practices that got removed from the traditions they were part of,
Right.
and flattened out, and divorced of any kind of ethical code of conduct. And so what you end up having is something that is easily commodifiable. And what's easily commodifiable is something that doesn't ask much of you. And it's flattened and filtered into a consumerist culture. And so you and your project, you and your satisfaction become the center point. And in some ways, I mean, not to continue dunking on Johnson for too much longer, but right, like the man spends $2 million a year on supplements and testing. Like, can you think of a further example of the me project? Like that, we used to have a culture where the wealthy were philanthropists, but this guy's made an immortality project out of himself. And again, he's an easy caricature here, but this is emblematic of the world we live in. This is where it's like we're living in the ideology of capitalism here. Wealth is capitalism's idea of liberation. So to become a billionaire is to become enlightened in the liberation framework of capitalism. It's just that it's a shitty model. It doesn't produce freedom.
Yeah.
It produces less friction around suffering, but that doesn't seem to actually create freedom or peace or joy. It actually creates petulant princelings who might kill us all.
Yeah, and only reduces suffering to a certain extent or to like a certain degree. It seems like it's also creating other sufferings for those people as well. And not only that, the irony, there was I forget his name, but I saw you posted about it. Uh some other soundbite recently that went viral of another billionaire talking about no billionaires or nobody smart is introspective at all, you know, and
Oh,
like
Andreessen.
there's no introspection in my life at all. And
Yeah.
this is a recent liberal invention, introspection that just makes you miserable. And I'm like, hold on a second. I'm just speechless at,
Yeah.
you know, the at that statement. So yeah, the irony is not only is this not working, but it's taking you further away from the actual enlightenment that you and I would kind of agree on in our view.
It was Mark Andreessen who said that. Yes. What I hope that this does is I hope some of this can help burst the bubble and the trance of the seduction of that kind of obscene wealth. I think these guys are just telling on themselves. Psychedelics can help you develop wisdom. They can help you zoom out. They can help you sort of see a bigger picture and see beyond yourself. But if you haven't developed any maturity, it can really amplify into grandiosity.
Yeah.
It's hard for us for a psyche to hold deep wisdom well without having developed maturity. The thing is, I would say that the project of psychology is to develop maturity. You can develop a lot, and you can develop a lot of maturity and be chronologically the age you are and not run by the 4-year-olds and the tyrannical 2-year-olds in your psyche. You can do that without wisdom and just kind of be like a ho-hum, like good person, and that's great. But you might not have a whole lot to say about the cycles of life and what drives us in a deeper way. That's where wisdom comes in. And we need both of these things. And I think psychedelics can be useful for that. Certainly, wisdom traditions, spirit, what to call them wisdom traditions, right? Spiritual traditions, any tradition that's been past the test of a generation or two in terms of what it's offering someone.
Yeah. And some of the things that I have seen in my own life where I look at where I meet somebody or I spend time with them and I walk away from the encounter with, wow, this person has a lot of wisdom. They're developed in some way that I would like to, you know, to have some of that. I would like to get to that point. They're, you know, it's the opposite of some of the things that we're talking about. They're some of the things that I find i- traits are simplicity, laughter, the ability to be present, and those three things just right there, like not even to elaborate more on it, but those three things are at least simplicity and presence are the opposite of what is kind of touted in our culture. And you know, we're bombarded by the things in our pockets and on our screens to move away from it. You know, it's like here's another shiny thing, you know, and 20 more tabs of it at the same time.
Yeah, it's the representation of life being shown to us in these shining rectangles.
When we talked last year, when I learned a little bit about you, that you're living on a big piece of land and that there's like community gardening and just a different connection to life and the earth and your community that you're creating and co-creating and choosing to be a part of. And that was very attractive to me, of like, at least in concept, of like, wow, I want to learn more about that. These seem to be uh interesting ways to live and energies to bring into life. Um and so far from what I know about you, you seem to be having a good time with it as well, which is also important.
Well, you're speaking to something important here, which I think is, and this is, you see this in how spirituality is framed in the West as well, which is that, we tend to understand things as an individual project, you know, and that this is where sort of the worldview of rugged individualism, certainly capitalism, but that, the way that we're framing liberation as a sort of an individual project. And it's just a limited view, right? Ultimately, right, as the Buddha would say, like you have to work out your liberation for yourself. So there's no one coming to save you. And certainly the mushrooms or the ayahuasca isn't. It's up to you. So that's true, as is true as Thich Nhat Hanh saying the next Buddha who's coming is the Sangha, you know, and that
Right.
um
The community.
uh, the way that, thank you, yes, the way that uh, it's like we're all convinced that it's like we each have to have our own everything, you know, like we eat. How many of us have our own lawnmower that we use what once a month? I think of the tool industry as an amazing one. That people are convinced and they're like that we were not capable of sharing these things, but you could say so much of the consumer, um, what's available for us as consumers is like we should each have our own everything. And look at me, I live in far away from town and have my own home gym, and I don't have to bump into anyone. And there are benefits to that, and it's a pain, and there's also this way in which something gets really lost. And I think this is sort of pointing back to, we have a culture that has continued, and I'm kind of paraphrasing McGilchrist here. Um, we have a culture whose best attempt at moving forward has been through deconstruction and by breaking everything down. Um, Certainly postmodernism has done that aggressively, but I would say that, the way that we just sort of are addicted to sort of quantification as well is contributing to this. And to your point, right, like that doesn't lead, it's actually a bit of a cul-de-sac philosophically. That there's a way, there's like, if there's a way forward, it's through not measuring depression scales as much as it is probably spending more time together. This is gonna sound like such a woo-woo platitude, but there's real truth to it, which is that the view that tries to measure where we're going is the view that actually is keeping us from finding it. What we're looking for is awe. What we're looking for is a sense of connection to the world and to each other. And there's a way in which having an algorithmic culture where things are so designed for us actually further objectifies us from each other. So my hope is that Brian Johnson and the rest of us as well can move from smoking DMT and saying, oh, wow, into moving into a world in which we're connected to I thou.
There was this poem that went a little viral this week from James A. Pearson. Did you see that? How to build a
Mhm.
tree. How to build a tree. Sometimes your next halting step is more powerful than the grandest vision. All a leaf knows about building a tree is to turn toward the light. What you were sharing kind of brought that up for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed.
Would you say what you shared is your view? How would you summarize your own view?
Well, I would say I'm deeply influenced by Buddhism, and the last few years more sort of the Kashmir Shaivism, sort of that view of non-duality and tantric view.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, I would say that, I mean, and this is where, I would say that when we say view, I would say often what we're saying is value. Well, what do we value? And view might be sort of philosophically a more sort of rigorously tested thing.
Yeah.
So what I would say, what I would when you ask me that, I feel like I don't think I can say I have a philosophically debated view, but I would say that there are things that I value deeply.
Yeah.
And uh, a- and part of that I think is taking a bit of a liberal arts approach to psychedelics, and that I think that's a view as a facilitator, but also as one of the participant, as the one experiencing, which is that uh, try it all, get interested. You also have your entire lifetime to do it. I would say that as someone who started as a licensed therapist, that's a that's a good view in which to engage psychedelics, and that's also deeply limited. Psychology has a good answer for helping people go from kind of fragile and broken to having a strong sense of self. But in terms of dissolving the sense of self, it doesn't have much to say. And on the flip side of that, the mystical traditions and the wisdom traditions seem to know something, what it is to take a self and dissolve it into something larger, but it can get very confused about um, infantile or toddler behavior, and from here we get to move into like, and what happens when you're not the center of everything? Can you open into a world in which you're part of something that's unfolding, and let that be the project, that you're part of that you're in service to that? Well, that's a more interesting story to me than psychedelics are about healing trauma.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about, sort of the difference between view and values. And as you were saying that, the question that came up for me was, does does anybody ever hold the same view that they learned? Or is it different because their own personal experience is interacting with this frame and their values and then sort of evolving and changing through
You
that,
bet.
right?
You bet. Oh my God, right? As
Yeah.
if any of this is static, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, 26 years of Dharma practice, and I just feel like I feel like now I'm getting it, is the story I've been saying for the whole time. It's just like you come to any of these things from the place you come to, and these are constant refinements and iterations. To me, that's also the beauty of this, and again, like the intersection of value and perspective to me is like, we're talking about the humanities. This isn't psychedelic science. This is the psychedelic humanities. This is a more interesting story. This is a more interesting way of engaging all this material. Like, your life is an experiment. The process of unfolding who and what you are gets to live into more magic and beauty. That's more interesting. So I'm here for that.
Could I share a experience that I had that like has widened
Please.
to kind of parallel what you started with? When I started working more intentionally with psychedelics, there was a lot of Buddhist framing. And that
Yes.
made sense to me. It's like, okay, 20 odd years of Buddhist practice, this makes sense. And it makes sense why these different images or symbols would show up in some of these experiences. And the Buddhist framing helped me navigate the expanded space. What really surprised me, and I didn't figure it out at all for a while, and I'm still unpacking it and processing exactly what it means, is that um, Shiva started to show up in my experiences. And in an avatar of Shiva that I had no frame or no pre notion of. In fact, there was an experience that I had where I had already started to resource myself with this particular sort of avatar because of how he was showing up in these ayahuasca experiences, but I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was like this, I don't know, like higher self sort of evolved masculine, kind of experience. And then this one night, I was listening to a song by Manish Damour that has the Shiva mantra in it, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. It's called Triambakam. And for some reason, I'm like, what is this song about? Like, what is this mantra about? And I Googled it, and the image that popped up on my Google was this this avatar, this Mahadeva avatar that I'd been seeing multiple times in psychedelic experiences, but I had never seen before, like outside of that. And I mean, it was this incredibly profound moment. I mean, I would remember just like weeping, um, and just being in awe of what is happening here and not being able to understand it from any sort of logic. And that, that relationship, if you want to call it that, has continued to develop in different ways. But I find it so interesting because it's like, this wasn't in my consciousness actively before I started to have these experiences. And now it is.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And this happens a lot for people. And so what I would hate is for any of the listeners to come away from this with the sense that what I'm saying is the only thing you'll encounter in psychedelics is what you already know about and believe. Not saying that at all, but I think it shapes what can happen. And then there's that magic. There's that magic of what else is possible and what else can come in, and whether it's the music opening something for you that was hiding in there, and then all of a sudden it's just, Jung would say, right? This is like, yep, collective unconscious is a real thing, and that all of this, I would say, in some sweet way, kind of points to the permeability of the individual, and that we're an individual culture. We know how to have our experience. But one of the things that the psychedelics can do is to teach us how to become more permeable. That's not such a weird thing. Plenty of other civilizations. And that more things can come through, things that are totally not our business, in the best way, meaning this was not self-generated. I think it's Jorge's Ferrer's book on transpersonal psychology, where he makes exactly this point, which is that there's the failing of transpersonal psychology has been to think of it as an individual experience and to miss the possibility of it, where they're actually capable of having an encounter from beyond ourselves.
Yeah, that's all of it to me. The group dynamics, what can come up within that, and then to expand it outward, where can I explore these areas that I had no idea about, but are definitely there.
Right. And in that, there's like an ongoing cultivation wouldn't be the right word, but it's relationship, right?
Right.
there's an unfolding, there's a curiosity, there's something that gets to happen.
Yeah. When I come back to it, it's always a, a similar message, which is, I'm always here, you just forget. Here's this experience where, like, if I read about it in a book, the next line would be, then I sold all my possessions and moved to an ashram in India, right? And for me, it was like another Tuesday. So what's wrong with me, you know? And it was like, hey, I'm always here. You just forgot again, and that's okay.
Well, let me say that there was another option that could have happened here. You could have forgotten, you could have sold all your belongings. You could have also started live streaming yourself channeling that and monetizing it.
Yes. By the way, my new Shiva channeling offer for $333 launches at the end of this podcast.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. A few things. One is, do you think being able to plot yourself on 3 points of a mystical scale would capture that experience for you?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it's off the charts for me, in what I can quantify.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still one of those experiences where I'm like, I I don't know if this is integratable. I can relate to it. I can have ripple effects in my life based on thinking about it or reflecting on it, especially like in a sort of somatic perspective. And I can definitely use it as a resource, um, in times that I need. Uh, but other than that, I'm like, this has become one of the major mysteries of my life. What I always go back to is, I know what it's like to live in my head. I know what it's like for the mental process to question, to analyze, to second guess, all of that stuff. And I know that there are moments in my life where all of that just drops away under the sheer weight of pure experience.
Yes.
And when that happens, it's like, well, I don't really care if you believe me or not, because I experienced it,
Yeah.
and that was definitely one of those moments, definitely widened the frame quite a bit, at the very least.
I appreciate hearing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I love that you brought in, that music can be a doorway that opens that up, because that was part of it. There was music, and then it sort of unlocked or opened the door to what came next as far as the experience.
Well, I mean, Judith Becker writes about this gorgeously in her book, Deep Listening, which is about trance and music. Um, and then it's like the music is actually uh, crucial to the engagement and um, access point of trance states. And certainly for me, it's I, I, s- s- I'm tripping over my own words because yeah, I think what I want to say here is that I won't go into a ton of detail, but to say that under the largest dose of LSD I've ever taken, the guide that I was working with at the time was playing a lot of Indian devotional music, and it opened a doorway for me that I was not looking for. That I thought that stuff was kind of corny, or just like, it's nice, but what? But like, it opened a devotional door in my soul that I've been following for 2.5 years now.
Hmm.
At the peak of it, he played a Lulu and Mishka song, which are these sweet Australians that do this sort of sweet spiritual white people music, which I love, But at the heart of it was this chant Hari Ram, Sita Ram. And I had like you, I had no connection to any of that, and found this pillar of blue light piercing all of reality, and was overwhelmed. I actually feel, I don't even want to say too much more about it. It feels so personal and so special that uh, I don't want to. It was to say it was one of the most important devotional mystical experiences of my life. Um, and it opened a door to devotion that I've been following. And I didn't know I was missing devotion. And now it actually feels like more important to me than my meditation practice. And to me, it was the music that was the vector to any of that.
Yeah.
And certainly there's a mixing of my heart, my being, and what wants to come through and what's available, and, the myriad causes and conditions.
Right.
But to me, this all circles back to sort of like the joy, not the joy, maybe the ecstasy, the promise of experience, and that there's beyond excitement is awe, and that there's something deeper that we can be opened to that can change us when we let it, and when the conditions are right. And that matters. That matters for this world. This matters for how we are with each other. And to me, psychedelics, of course, don't have the copyright on any of this, but they are a doorway to what's beautiful right here.
Yeah.
Can I share a poem with you?
Please.
So this is by William Martin. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself.
I love that. How do you think one shows somebody else that?
I think you just enjoy it yourself. You,
Mm,
you let your enjoyment be contagious.
mm. Makes me think of my grandfather. He was a farmer, and like upstate New York. And I remember there were I have memories of these moments walking with him outside. And I think the context was we were gonna feed his dogs. He had all these hunting dogs and stuff. But these moments where he would just stop, and like he was taking it in, like the whole view. And there was a stillness and like a peace to him that I noticed. And it still like stays with me,
You know,
you know?
that's
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. This is where ChatGPT is going to tell me to cut the silence, and you're gonna lose your audience. You better like edit it tighter. Yeah, you've been
Yes,
writing a lot about music as the missing experience. So I'm glad that we got a chance to fold that in because I've been really enjoying that.
well, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that you're just staying with it. Really, there's a part of me that like hopes this translates, and there's a part of me that like doesn't care if somebody else doesn't get it. Like maybe come back in a few years and it might land in a different way. But I
Well,
appreciate you just staying with it.
I I've lulled myself out of the I'm gonna sound smart trance into the light coming through my window trance is quite compelling.
Yeah,
So hopefully that any silence here is an invitation for the listener to luxuriate what's right in front of them.
that's right. Man, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And I it's funny, like over the past few years podcasting, I feel like I end up in to really oversimplify it. It's like there are guests where uh I feel like I can sort of hold my own and I'm at like a peer level. And then there's other times where I feel like I'm trying to keep up and just like comprehend and like, wow, this person is um smarter than me or knows more about this topic and I'm just trying to keep up. And oftentimes when I talk to you, like it vacillates between those two. Like there's certain things that we talk about where I'm like, oh yeah, I got something to contribute here. And then there's other times where I'm like, well, I'm just gonna listen because there's a lot. I feel like I got a lot to learn.
Well, it's uneven playing fields here because you're not living inside this head of mine that's doing its best to write a book on all of this. So
Yeah,
uh, I'm pretty constantly mulling all of this. I do have a Substack where I'm writing for that, but and hopefully a book will be coming out next year.
I'm looking forward to reading it and having you back on to talk about it.
Well, thanks.
What else you got going on that people should know about?
The books or the my Substack's the big one right now. It's called Psychedelic Artistry. I'm writing about all this kind of stuff. Yeah, the book will come. And yeah, I'm otherwise I'm very full in my private practice, but I'm also doing supervision and consultation for facilitators. So if anyone's interested in that, they can reach out.
Nice. Well, we'll link the Substack and your website on the show page. And yeah, I have a feeling like I did, because I heard you on Psychedelics today, and then I was like, man, I want to talk to that guy. So I have a feeling that the this conversation will resonate with the right people and they will seek you out in the way that I did.
It's been the best. So yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Jonathan. I really appreciate the chance to have conversations like this.
Appreciate you, brother.
That's it for this episode of The Vital Point. Huge thanks to Pierre Bouchard for joining us. You can find his work at pierrebouchardcounseling.com or check out his awesome Substack, Psychedelic Artistry. If this episode supported your pathway to integration, consider sharing it with a friend. And if you're looking to go deeper, you can join me inside the Pathways to Integration community on School, or reach out to explore options for private coaching work. Until next time, remember it's not about the method you choose. The vital point is to practice.